Start. So, as I said, welcome. I'm very excited to be having our first of a series of webinars on the net zero opportunity, and to have Chris, Claire from SLR and Phil from MRT with us today. The first webinar today is titled The Net Zero Opportunity, Making It Happen. And before we start there, I'm just going to do a quick little introduction about the Growth Hub for you as well. Lovely. So my name is Roya. I'm Roya Crudes. I'm one of the senior growth champion managers on the Enterprise M3 Growth Hub. And really, I wanted to share with you, if you weren't aware, that the Enterprise M3 Growth Hub is a fully funded, government-funded business support programme. And we're here to help and support you as part of your growth strategy and your net zero strategy. And it's a bespoke, tailored support. So we develop personalised plans, and the activity that we do with you on a one-to-one basis and the workshops such as this one that we're working on can focus on your key priorities. So that could be net zero, could be procurement, marketing, finances. And we also work with a range of experts, specialist associates on the programme, which I'm very pleased to say that Chris Fry is one of those. So following on from the webinar, do please, if you haven't registered with us, make sure that you have, because you will have the opportunity under the Growth Hub to continue having some of that one-to-one activity with Chris and his team. With that in mind and aware of the time, I'm going to suggest that we move on with the webinar.
Thanks very much, Roya. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Fry, and yeah, we're delighted to be here to start the Net Zero series within the overall programme of support webinars and events. And what we're aiming to do here is just to provide some inspiration from other businesses and experiences that we've had working with businesses, and some resources. So that's whether you have already started your net zero business journey, or whether you're looking to take those initial steps today. And then we have two further follow-on webinars, which my colleague Claire will tell you about a bit later on. So we'll be giving you some quick wins, lots of examples, and sort of very much sharing ideas as well, and do feel free to chip in via the chat, either with comments or thoughts or questions when we come to that as well. So I'm the co-founder of Acceler. We're a small business ourselves, so we understand the sort of the business dynamics around this agenda. We work to help to accelerate the green transition, working with the public sector, private sector, and the third sector as well. And as Roya was saying, we do provide that net zero business support, which is part of the overall Growth Hub offer. And it is very much a bespoke thing. So we kind of reflecting on the kind of stuff we do. We do one-to-one coaching with businesses and help them to kind of shift the dial a little bit and move on to a sort of front foot approach on net zero and sustainability. And we also just tackle specific questions. So whatever the issues are for your particular business, we can look into those, as well as doing more systematic work. So, for example, action planning, heat maps, and using other tools and so on as well. So that's the service that can be part of the follow-on to this series of webinars, if that's appropriate for you. In terms of the webinar today, giving you an initial kind of understanding of climate change and the role of net zero in addressing climate change. So that's the sort of the first part that I'll cover, and then we'll move on into the main kind of parts of it around the benefits of net zero, practical actions you can take. We'll hear from our guest Phil from MRT Castings. It's great to have you with us, Phil, to give us the real world experience as well. And then we'll kind of conclude the webinar with an idea of the actions and resources and so on that are available to you as well. And we'll revisit these aims towards the end of the session as well. So we'll move on then into the first segment, which is around climate change, the global picture. And this will not be a new issue for you, of course. You will be familiar with climate change. If you'd like to move on to the next slide, please, Rupert. We'll just I guess remind ourselves of what the context is here, that global temperatures have been rising since the pre-industrial sort of time, since 1850 or so, and that's caused by human-induced emissions from the products we make and use, and our lifestyles and development and so on. And record temperatures were experienced already this year, and this year is set to be about 1 degree higher, 1 degree Celsius higher than the average for the last 30 years. And to put that into further context, we're moving now to sort of around 1.2 degrees warmer on average globally from those pre-industrial levels and temperatures. Now, so we're on the trajectory, the world is on the trajectory of about a 1.5 degree average temperature increase within about 10 years. And if you've been sort of following it in terms of the climate change global debate and the global discussions at the conferences that happen every year, then globally we're looking to keep that temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees or thereabouts. And as close as we can get to that, it is expected that the very worst consequences of climate change may be avoided if we can get to hold the temperature at that level. But at the moment, we're on a trajectory globally to go well past that. So this is kind of a real here and now issue. It's not an issue for the future, as it perhaps was thought to be before. And impacts are already happening on all areas of life, both in this country, but particularly in other places around the world. And here's a few headlines around, climate change from just sort of recent times, and some of them very locally to us around sort of Hampshire and Surrey and so on as well. With the data now sort of coming in thick and fast, and the ability to attribute severe weather events like heat waves, wildfires, flooding, high winds and storms. We've just been through a cycle, of course, of the flooding and the storms in this part of the world, and those are increasingly attributed or exacerbated, or frequency is happening more often because of the effect of the emissions in the atmosphere there. So I don't know if any of your businesses have had those kind of examples of disruption already. So any heat wave disruptions or transport links not working and that kind of stuff. Be good if you want to share any of those in the chat. But one that is very close to my heart is the Hook landslip. So that's the Hook, the main line from Woking down to Basingstoke, Winchester, and the south coast and southwest. That landslip took place back in around January time, and the trains were not able to run on those affected tracks for a number of weeks, although they did manage to get some service up and running back within about a week to pass through, or within a few days. But there was a lot of disruption to local businesses and communities. But for me, there are two things really startling about that incident. One was to see the picture of the rails literally hanging in midair because the land had fallen away below them, and fortunately there were no injuries. There were no trains actually directly affected. It was an issue that was spotted before it caused any catastrophic kind of accident. But that was startling. But the other thing is really how benign the environment is. I live in Fleet in Hampshire, and it's only just 5 miles down the road. It's basically a field with a railway embankment next to it, and there's a lot of that around. If you look at our railway network around the country, 9,800 miles of track around the UK, and there must be a lot of it on embankments alongside fields. This is nothing particularly remarkable. It's not a particularly severe environment, so it's quite interesting to sort of think about what that means in terms of how our kind of day-to-day lives could be affected, and the accidents could indeed happen. So it's very much a here and now issue anyway, climate change. In terms of net zero then, moving on to how does net zero fit into that question, and what does net zero actually mean? So it's the emissions of the greenhouse gases, not just carbon dioxide and carbon, but there are 7 main greenhouse gases, including methane and nitrous oxide, and then some other less common gases, but much more potent gases in terms of causing the global climate change. But net zero is about balancing a reduction in our emissions with what can then be removed from the atmosphere. So in order to track, the net zero target being to then keep temperatures below the 1.5 degrees of warming, and those balancing activities, the offsets for emissions must be actually removing carbon, so reforestation and so on, not just avoiding emitting it in the first place. And so what does that mean for business? It means that the focus is very much on reducing emissions, and for countries as well, we should be reducing the emissions along our net zero pathways, and then leaving a residual amount of emissions that can't be offset to then be can't be reduced, that can then be offset. And if we refer to the global organization, it's a very respected organization, the Science Based Target Initiative, it would advise that if you're a business committing to net zero, you should be, first of all, you should be targeting rapid reduction, so rapid action over the next 5 to 10 years, and then a deep decarbonisation for the harder to reduce emissions. So do some stuff now, get going with those things which you can make the difference on straight away, but then progress over the coming years and decades to deep decarbonisation, leaving only 5 to 10% of it to be offset. So 90 to 95% we should be achieving through reduction of emissions. So moving on to the UK's response to the issue and net zero. So we, as a country, were the first major economy in June 2019 to agree a national target for net zero by 2050. But at the moment, and we have a legal commitment to do so, but we're now reported that we're not currently on track against that trajectory. We as a country have done a lot of emissions reduction, particularly in our energy supply, but we now need to sort of get back on track. So that's the Committee on Climate Change's latest report. So they review that on behalf of government, and that's their view at the moment. We're slipping behind our pathway to net zero. So there's more to be done, and to be done sort of straight away by different sectors and actors. And just to say that alongside net zero and decarbonisation, the government, we've also committed as a country to supporting the natural environment and other environmental goals and so on. So the Environment Act that's mentioned there also sets out and binds targets around a number of other areas of environmental improvement as well. And that's an important aspect to kind of think of tackling carbon and greenhouse gas emissions and climate change alongside those other environmental improvement. So yeah, just moving on in terms of what else is happening. So businesses operate in their own unique circumstance and maybe part of a network or an industry group, a sector, and there are mandatory and voluntary arrangements to help support different sectors and different parts of the economy. So there are various groups there. So if your business happens to be in the construction sector, there's the coming together of that sector in the Construct Zero initiative for the built environment. There's another example on a more specific industry would be the Plastics Pact as well. And then there are sort of cross-sectoral initiatives, one of them being Get Nature Positive, which is an emerging area as well for business as well. So I think what's really helpful is there's lots of resources out there, and some of them are going to be specific to your industry and business. So that's another way you can start to make good progress in this area, as well as the more general information that we'll be coming on to sharing a little bit more. So again, within the chat, if you want to share any sectors or industry initiatives that you're involved in or aware of, then please do so. Obviously, those live today can do that. If you're listening to the recording, then you may be able to sort of share that afterwards. But so that's the UK's response in a nutshell, and we'll now get on really into the more of the focus of this particular webinar, which is looking at that from a individual business point of view. So if we move on to that next section, I'll hand over to my colleague Claire.
Thank you, Chris. That was a really helpful outline of where we are. And yeah, I'd like to take us through now the business benefits of starting our net zero journey. Rupert, if you'd like to move to the next slide. Here we see a summary of the benefits that we are going to look at this afternoon, and what we're focused on is that competitive advantage that working on net zero brings to our businesses. We're going to look at each of these in turn, and we're going to look at some examples of businesses in the EM3 region who are already starting to reap the benefits of some of these ways of working. Next slide, please, Rupert. So the first one, and where a lot of businesses start with net zero, and rightly so, is cutting costs. Something that is important to all businesses. And I'll focus here on energy, because that's an area where has had a lot of impact on many businesses in the last 18 months, 2 years. In fact, we've seen energy prices doubled in the last 5 years, and there's continued uncertainty about energy pricing, both in the home and business sector. But what we do know, and what our colleagues at the Energy Saving Trust tell us, is that energy efficiency, so actually looking to reduce our energy bills, can save small businesses between 18 and 25% of their bills, of their energy bills. And we have real life experience of this with a colleague who's joined us today, Phil from MRT Castings. Now, MRT Castings are a die casting machine and finishing specialist based in Andover. And they added a lot of monitoring equipment to their manufacturing line and their office, and they saved 28% on their energy bills on the first 2 years of their project. So it is possible, and this is something, a great starting point in our net zero journey. So we look forward to hearing more from you later in the webinar, Phil, and thank you for joining us today. We do have another slide about the energy prices there that you can see that it's been made available from one of the government websites, and you can see that actually that the very small users, business users, are paying the most for their energy, and that huge rise in costs between Q2 last year and Q2 this year has been immense. So it feels like this is an area where everybody could gain value from taking a look or taking another look at their energy use. We'll move on to the next benefit now, which is to talk about increasing business and investor value. Now, climate change, as Chris has outlined, is having an impact globally, and it has raised more than an eyebrow now for investors. They see climate change and the impact on businesses as a significant business risk. So this is something that we should think about when we are presenting ourselves to investors, is they may well want to know how we are working towards mitigating climate change in the short, medium and the long term. And so this means that investors are looking at more reassurance that we're looking at more than financial performance. They're also interested in that non-financial performance, and this net zero and sustainability journey is a big part of that. And I use Piper as an example here. They're a brand creation company, but they invest in some of their brands. And there's a quote at the bottom there that clearly shows that they see sustainability and net zero as a way of future-proofing brands and their investment, so that they want to know that they're investing with minimal risk. A really interesting one to consider going forward. Next benefit, please, Rupert. Yeah, the next one is about how customers are changing their view and how they are using their buying power to demonstrate to businesses when they require more from the businesses that they buy from. So increasing customer value and loyalty. So we've got some survey results here. They're from the Boston Consulting Group, and they interviewed 10,000 UK consumers on their attitudes across 100 brands and 13 sectors. There's the link there at the bottom if you want to look at the research in more detail. And what we see is that customers are starting to be more discerning in terms of sometimes using their buying power to switch to brands that have good sustainability and net zero credentials. We see most of that awareness in sectors like retail, restaurants, hospitality, and transport. But if it hasn't arrived in other sectors, it is likely to do so very shortly. And at Accela, we worked with a hospitality business called Taste Creative. They're based in Spelthorne, and they provide dinner party services to people in people's homes. And actually, they found that their customers are really, really keen to know that produce that has been served in their home is locally sourced, and it's something that Taste Creative's customers are creating that demand for those more sustainable products and services. Equally, when we look at business to business sales, the drive is also there. So the UK government and NHS and other organisations, for those really big contracts, 5 million plus, they're already requiring tenders into those for those pieces of work to have carbon reduction plans. And that requirement will start to trickle down to smaller suppliers. And in some research by Standard Chartered, they discovered that 8 in 10 multinationals plan to stop using suppliers who could negatively impact on their carbon reduction commitment. So the big companies are looking for suppliers who can support them in this journey, and therefore need to have thought through their own net zero journey. And Enhanced Care Services, who are they're a medical event medical cover provider based in Southampton. They've already seen this. They provide services that they're tendering for, and they are already being asked in their tenders to demonstrate their approach on net zero to support those bigger commitments by large organisations. So here we see those large net zero commitments trickling down to smaller suppliers. Next benefit. Thank you, Rupert. So the next benefit is supply chain resilience, a really key one. The COVID-19 pandemic taught us some really hard lessons about the importance of supply chain resilience. And I think resilience has a couple of meanings here. One, to be more in control of our energy supply and materials, both really important to business resilience. So we can, that becoming more energy efficient, or indeed looking to create our own energy, will build resilience. Be it keeping custody of the materials that we use by exploring different business models, such as rental and reuse, helps us become more resilient. And going back to what Chris was saying about the impact, thinking about the impact of a changing climate on your own business, this is where it fits in here. We could well see assets near rivers and in flood zones, for example, being challenged increasingly in the next few years. So an awareness and action planning around that is absolutely critical. And an example of a bigger business in the region, Stana, based in Andover, with their stairlift kit, they not only sell new bits of kit, but they also sell reused and reconditioned stairlifts. They have a built to last philosophy and source quality parts, so it makes sense for them to reuse and recondition those systems where possible, giving a 62% carbon saving compared to a new lift. Also, there's a considerable cost saving that can be passed on to the customer as well. Next benefit. Thank you, Rupert. Increasingly, we see that having good net zero and sustainability credentials attracts and helps to retain employees. So here is the results of a survey by the Green Business Bureau. It is American, just to note, but I think the same principles apply. And suggest that workers want to work for an employer who has meaningful environmental planning and activity going on, and actually where that wasn't present, that's part of people's decision to move on. And another small business in the region, I think they're Andover based as well, Lionel Hitchin. They're a manufacturer and supplier of natural flavours and flavour ingredients into the food and beverage industry. Yeah, they have, well, their colleagues have self-identified themselves as being really keen on this area and meet monthly to make the business more eco-friendly and motivate their colleagues to join in with environmental initiatives. So increasingly, this is an important issue for individuals who work in your businesses. And the final benefit is perhaps one that we would most expect, is to meet environmental regulation. So all businesses have a legal responsibility to deal with waste appropriately and prevent pollution. And increasingly, we see that large companies all have increased responsibilities to help them monitor their energy use and carbon emissions. There's mandatory reporting on that now into government. Whilst we don't have any clear line of sight on that changing to include small companies, I think with the scale of the task ahead of us, that becomes more and more likely every year, and businesses would do well to have that in their line of sight for future. And other environmental legislation such as congestion charges, low emission zones and clean air zones in cities are having implications for businesses in terms of realigning their fleet all the time. So, and increasingly the Environment Act also has other topics in it, such as the reduction of single-use plastic packaging and dealing with forest risk commodities like cocoa and palm oil. So environmental regulation is will always be there as a basics, but things are being added all the time, and it is something to very much to keep an eye on. So that's the end of the benefits. I hope that has been useful just to run through those and hear about those local examples. In summary, you know, this is the other side of the coin. This is the implications of not doing anything. There are financial implications that we see there on the slide. One that we haven't talked about, I think most of them we've talked about, but insurance requirements is an interesting one and may well become more important as that climate risk becomes more. And actually we see here on the map, it's a map of climate hazards provided courtesy of the National Trust that shows the likelihood of climate hazards in the UK by 2060, and we see Southampton on there, we see Basingstoke, and it's all looking quite orange and red, which means there's a high risk of climate hazards in those areas. And the second area to look at is, yeah, as reflecting on the previous slide, is around changes in practices and new legislation, standards, and moving with consumer trends all falls into this area as well. Next slide. And just in benefit, another reflection of the Green Business Bureau survey that was undertaken. Really, by focusing on sustainability and net zero, businesses tend to see returns across 4 areas. People stay with them for longer, their revenue increases, people are more productive, and there's some element of improvement in risk protection and market value as well. So that's the, in theory, benefits with a little bit of local flavour to it, but I'm going to pass over now to Phil, who will give us the real insight into what it's like to be on the net zero journey for a business. Over to you, Phil.
Brilliant, thanks Claire. Hopefully everyone can see my presentation. So thanks Claire and Chris for the invitation to just sort of join you this afternoon and just share some of our experiences. I'm Phil Raunton, I'm the Managing Director at MRT, and obviously, you know, like some of you on the call, running an SME and looking at, you know, everything we've been talking about so far this afternoon. I think we can all appreciate the importance of net zero and getting there, but it can be a little daunting in where do I start, and actually sort of practical ideas of what we can do in our own businesses. So all I really wanted to do is just take 10-15 minutes to just share our journey over the last 10 years or so. We are in an industry that's notorious perhaps for being high energy users. We're an aluminium die casting foundry, so we melt metal for a living, so that does use a lot of energy, both gas and electricity, but obviously we've been working very hard over the last few years, both from a cost sustainability point of view, but also from an environmental sustainability point of view, in how we can reduce our impact, you know, our consumption, our emissions, and our impact on the environment. So just to give you a little context, no sales pitch intended here, but just to give you a context so you can picture our business. So MRT manufacture aluminium die castings. So we have a foundry where we're melting aluminium and producing castings through gravity and high pressure die casting. We also then take those castings and perform secondary operations, CNC machining, finishing, and building sub-assemblies. We've got about 70 people in Andover, spread across about 8 buildings on the Woolworths Industrial Estate, and we turn over about 8.5 million. The business is a family-owned business, third generation, and we were originally established in London and then moved to Andover in the mid-60s. And we deal across a very broad range of different industries, from medical devices through to supercars, bit of defence, bit of aerospace, bit of marine. I think what's interesting in the context of sustainability is how all of those customers in all of those different sectors are now increasingly expecting us to have a program towards net zero. They all have an expectation in their own business and an expectation from their supply chain that we're moving in the direction of net zero. Some sectors are pushing harder than others, and they all have a slightly different twist on it. So if I take, for example, automotive and aerospace, their emphasis is mainly on how we can reduce the weight of the components that we supply to them so that they then in turn can reduce the emissions in the vehicles or the planes that they're producing. If we take the medical sector, they're interested in sustainability more as a part of the sort of corporate CS, you know, the corporate sort of sustainability and ethics policies of the business. If we take lighting and architectural components, they have a lot of requirements around reducing packaging, reducing waste on building sites, and actually sort of easing that installation process. So everyone's driving for the same thing, but they all have maybe slightly different priorities and a slightly different pace for their sustainability agenda. But definitely across the board, we're seeing pressure and expectation from our customers. It's quite challenging because there's not a recognised standard for net zero. Or your journey towards it. We are accredited to ISO 14001, so obviously that's a management system for our environmental management, and that's become a bit of a prerequisite for most of our sort of industrial customers, but that doesn't actually set you any targets of what you're going to achieve in terms of energy reduction, so that's down to us. So we try and communicate that very, very clearly to our customers. So as I say, foundries are a high energy user. Energy typically represents about 10% of costs in foundries. So actually, whilst you could say, you know, we're part of the problem because we're a high energy user, actually, because it's such a high cost to us, we're very careful about how we use it. Energy efficiency relates directly to our bottom line. So we obviously, from a business point of view, don't want to waste anything. We also actually recycle all of our materials. So most of the aluminium that we're producing fresh castings with is actually recycled scrap, recycled, reprocessed, cleaned, and with various elements added back into it. But so we're using recycled material, and the castings that we're producing are fully recyclable. The most important thing in a foundry in terms of efficiency, as well as using sort of efficient kit, is actually making sure that we're producing parts as quickly and efficiently as possible, and reducing our scrap levels. If you can take your scrap levels, if scrap levels were 10% of your production, if you can actually eliminate that scrap, you've actually saved 10% of your energy. So increasing yield, increasing productivity, reducing cycle times is actually the most sort of sustainable way of achieving energy reductions, and it also obviously helps your business bottom line. We standardize the range of materials we use so that we're not changing materials all the time, because that can be quite wasteful. And we use very expensive machinery, but what that means is that actually when we're investing in new kit, because we use so much energy, we're really thinking about energy efficiency and payback times when we're upgrading kit. So I think actually foundries, whilst in context, we use a lot of energy, actually we've always been quite efficient with our energy consumption. But about 10 years ago, we sort of said, well, we can't just keep saying, well, we're a foundry, so of course we use a lot of gas. We need to really aggressively drill down and see where that gas is being used, where that electricity is being used, and how we can improve things. So working on the old theory of if you can monitor it, measure it, then you can manage it, we started saying, okay, let's not just look at our annual gas bills, our annual electricity bills. Let's work out where that energy is being used. So actually with some grant funding and for consultancy, very similar to what the Growth Hub is offering now. We started a small project back in 2012, I think it was actually, to actually collate all of our energy consumption, all of our material consumption, our water consumption, and our waste production, and just put some figures around that, and then drill down into individual machines and work centres. So what we did is we hired in some kit with some consultancy, and actually put energy monitors on all of our main production machines just for a 12-week period to actually work out where that energy was being used. Because typically we'd always said, well, we've got great big furnaces that are melting aluminium at 700 degrees. Of course, that's where most of our energy is going. When we looked at it, actually, the consumption was much more widely spread, and there were some significant opportunities. If we look at the graph that's on the screen here, you'll see the energy log just for 4 CNC machines. So they're stacked up on top of each other. Now, we operate single shift, so the pattern you can see there is not too surprising. This is just looking at a typical week, and you can see from the time chart along the bottom that about sort of between 6 and 8 o'clock in the morning, consumption goes up. And then between sort of 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening, consumption drops back down again. There's a little dip in the middle of the day around lunchtime. But what was interesting to us was you can see that we've got green and red still as a base load effectively overnight between those peaks. Well, we only operate single shift. So what's going on? As soon as we saw that data, went down onto the shop floor and said, guys, you're supposed to turn your machines off at night. What's going on? Where's this energy being used? And they looked at the machines and they said, but we are turning them off. There's a power button on the front of the machine. We turn it off every night. Come and look tonight. I went down and looked. Yep, sure enough, they're turning every machine off. But the data was still showing this consumption overnight, about half as much consumption from those machines overnight when they were doing nothing as when they were working during the day. And it turns out we were totally unaware that actually those machines, whilst we were turning the power off at the front control, they each had a transformer. And so power was being consumed by the transformers overnight, and all we needed to do was turn them off at the isolator at the wall, not at the power button at the front of the machine. Now, if we hadn't monitored those machines, we'd never have known that. But that move alone saved us £20,000 a year, just by turning off the isolator rather than the button on the front of the machine. So that's the power of this sort of data. And as soon as we looked at that, we said, okay, this really shows what we could do if we could analyze the data more carefully. And as soon as we could articulate and explain to our employees, guys, just by turning off the right button means we could save £20,000 a year. That's good for all of us. Then everyone suddenly got more engaged with the process. So we actually created some dashboards. So we installed some more permanent monitoring around the factory and basically summarized the consumption in each department. So we have a foundry, we have a machine shop, we have a dispatch area. So we actually put dashboards on TV screens around the business so that we could see real time, logging every 15 minutes where the consumption was. And actually it created a focus initially on turning machines off, both at the beginning and end of the day, but also like turning them off at lunchtime, for example. But also it made people think about working more efficiently. So actually, did it make sense that there were a few people who worked on a Friday afternoon and a few people that worked on a Saturday morning, and yet the compressor was on for both of those? Whereas actually, if the guys on Saturday morning worked on a Friday afternoon along with the other guys, we wouldn't need to turn the compressor on a Saturday morning. Things like that actually made everyone look at it. And it was measurable and easy. And in the first 2 years of actually that program, we managed to reduce our energy consumption by 28%. And we barely spent anything on upgrading kit. The only kit that we actually put in at that time was one other thing we found was a lot of our gas that we typically thought was being used in our furnaces was being used to heat the buildings. And we had what were quite efficient heaters. You may have them in your own factories or warehouses, gas-fired sort of space heaters mounted on the wall that blow hot air into the workshop. But most of that hot air rises and goes up into the ceiling space. And at that time, we didn't have any what you call destratification fans to blow that heat back down. But by installing destrat fans in the roof, effectively what that did is it blew the hot air back down. And so the thermostats didn't keep triggering for those heaters to keep blowing more hot air up. The fans were just blowing the hot air down onto the employees, and that was another big saving. So just some very simple, practical, quick wins, but most of that 28% reduction was just in behavioural change, and actually creating a little bit of competition between different departments in the business. So very simple. Now moving on to more recently, so we had the opportunity, we bought a new site in 2018 and built a brand new foundry. So our old building was 55 years old. We'd done as much work as we could to make it operate efficiently, but the layout of it wasn't ideal. It was a 1965 building, so it wasn't insulated. The electrical installation wasn't ideal, things like that. And the business was growing, so we bought a new site and built a brand new foundry, 60% bigger than the old one. But we didn't want to just build a new shed and pick up all of the old problems, pick them up and move them into the new building. So we looked at absolutely every element of our operations in that foundry and thought, how could we do it more efficiently and use less energy? So obviously the new building was built to the latest building standards. So better insulation, better ventilation, all of those kind of things. But it was also the practices and the equipment that we moved into the building that enabled us to take the benefit of our experience over the last few years, where we've been monitoring those things and install things in a more efficient way. So if we take lighting, for example, when we designed this new building, we maximised the use of natural daylight, a lot more roof lights. We put LED lighting in throughout the building and motion activation in frequently used areas like corridors, washrooms, things like that. So instant savings, but that's obviously a benefit you can have when you're, when you're starting fresh with a new building. You can retrofit all of that kit into an existing facility, but the payback is going to be a little bit longer. Another big one we identified was our compressors. So for those of you using compressors in your to operate your machinery, compressors produce an awful lot of waste heat. When we installed our new compressors in the new facility, we were actually able to plumb it in so that we captured the waste heat from those compressors, put it through a thermal store, and effectively used that waste heat to heat our offices and all the hot water for the washrooms. So we actually don't use any gas now for heating our offices. We're heating our offices and workshop washrooms entirely with waste heat from our compressors. In our specific machinery operations, and I won't linger on this too long because it's obviously maybe a little less relevant to sort of generic businesses, but we retrofitted all of our old equipment that we moved from the old foundry into the new one with new motors, new control systems. Some of those machines were only 15, 20 years old, but actually the advances in technology mean that investment in sort of upgrading those machines, but still using the sort of shell of the main chassis of the old machines, but with new motors and more efficient control systems, instant savings. The extra space also gave us the opportunity to automate. Now, some might say, hang on, automation uses power, so surely that's going the wrong way. But actually, no, for our process, if we can cycle our machines faster, then we're holding molten aluminium for less time and we're producing more parts per hour. So whilst we're using a little more energy in operating a bit more machinery, we're actually producing every casting with a smaller carbon footprint. We also retrofitted recuperative burners to our gas-fired furnaces, so that captures the waste heat that goes out of the chimney of the furnace and uses it to preheat the air that's going into the mix of the gas burners. In our machine shop, we invested again in upgrading that, but also changing the way that we laid that out and how we use those machines. So, for example, we used to program our machines on the machine. Now we use software offline so that we can be doing that without turning the machine on, without interrupting production. So it's more productive, but it also uses less energy there. We also work closely with our customers to help them save, reduce their carbon footprint of the components and their own processes. So we look at their assembly processes, their secondary operations that they're performing after they buy the castings in from us, but also helping them design castings that are lighter weight, that use a bigger proportion of recycled material. So it's about looking at every aspect of your operations, both kind of, your interaction with your customers, your on-site operations, and the logistics of sort of how you're passing castings out. So I'm skipping over these, but really what I'm trying to give you a gist of is how you've got to look at absolutely every aspect, but you don't have to revolutionize everything overnight. It's by getting awareness of all those different elements that you can then just start to make some gradual incremental improvements. Material obviously is a big part of our business, but the same goes for a lot of industries. So we increased our focus on recycling. So in our case, when you make a casting, you have a running system. We saw that off. That's recycled in-house, but also all of our swarf from the machining process and our dross, so the oxides from the top of the furnaces, we collect all of that and we actually send it back to our smelters. So it's closed loop reprocessing, because our smelters are sending a truck in every month with fresh material for us, but they're taking the waste away on that same vehicle, reprocessing that, and that comes back to us the next month. So in terms of keeping track of things, so we set 4 very simple KPIs: our electricity consumption, our gas consumption, our water consumption, and our packaging consumption. But obviously, all of those things are used relative to business levels. So what you don't want to do is punish yourself that, if you've had a year where sales are up, turnover's up, well, it's probably likely that however much you focused on energy efficiency, your electricity consumption or your gas consumption are going to be up too. So we try and look at our consumption relative to business performance. So in the case of electricity, it's mainly used for our machining processes. So our KPI is to judge electricity consumption per £1,000 of sales. Our gas consumption is mainly used for melting aluminium. So we measure that against the tonnage of aluminium that we've processed in a year. Same for water, because we're washing our castings. So come out with some measurements that are relative and relevant to your business. But the sooner you can start measuring it, then the sooner you can start managing it. Those are just our figures for the last financial year there. So 250 kilowatts of electricity consumed per £1,000 of turnover, 26,000 kilowatts per ton of aluminium dispatched. Okay. So more recently, we've been working with Claire and Chris as part of the Growth Hub funding that we were able to get, and really I use that for a bit of a sanity check of where we are, get us maybe sort of a little bit re-engaged and just reset on our roadmap, because we have made a lot of improvements, but we're very conscious that we want to stay ahead of the crowd. We're in an industry that's probably going to be at the forefront of some of the pressure in terms of regulation from government and from expectations from our customers. So working with Chris and Claire, we did a heat map of basically what were the areas of the business that we've already made good progress on, and where were some quick wins and some longer term sort of strategic goals. So that's sort of typical of the process that we've looked at with Chris and Claire. And where are we going next? Well, in our case, our customers are really starting to push us to actually report on the carbon content of the products that we're selling into them. So we're engaging with a consultant to actually go through that process. We've now logged our scope 1 and 2 emissions, and we're working on our scope 3 now. And I know that Claire and Chris are going to present about carbon footprinting in one of the later webinars. So I'll leave the excitement of that to you. But I think that's something that we are all going to be under pressure, whatever your industry. It's just a matter of time as to how soon it's introduced. But certainly in our industry, we're seeing requests for that from our customers, even though there's not a legislative sort of or regulatory requirement for it yet. We're moving to electric vehicles, and that's a good quick win for us. And we're also just scoping out, and it's something that Claire and Chris helped us initially look at as part of our Growth Hub funding. So we're now just scoping out a project for solar panels on the roof of our machine shop to start on-site generation. So just sort of wrapping that up in terms of, for you and your businesses, if you're anything like us, then, it is daunting. It is difficult to know where to start. But from our experience, I would say use the support that's out there. There are various different funding schemes, for an initial sort of bit of consultancy. But the Growth Hub project that we accessed very easily without a lot of sort of form filling and access some time with Chris and Claire was very useful to us. Look at every aspect of the business. Don't take what you think is your biggest consuming area or most wasteful area and look at that in isolation. Look at the whole business, and lead by example. You know, if you want to engage your team, then show them that you're prepared to change the way you operate before you start expecting them to do the same. Measure it and monitor it and make that really public, make it really visual and as accessible to everyone as you can. We use certification and audit, partly because our customers are auditing us all the time, but we also find that by having certification through ISO 14001, you're regularly, you know, every 6 months we have a surveillance visit, and it means you just can't let things slip too far, so it keeps you on your toes. And celebrate the successes. Part of the reason we're doing this is, you know, to get the message out to our customers that we're part of the solution, not part of the problem. So if you're making progress and you know, making some wins, then celebrate it. Use social media, use your marketing, get the word out there, and raise your profile as a business that's actually doing something to make a change. And that is going to be something that will really drive your profile with customers who are looking for that. And as Claire said, the same for your customers, same for your employees. Generally, particularly younger employers are much more aware of these considerations now, and they want to be in a team and in a business that's actually doing something positive for the drive to net zero. Okay, I think that's me done. So I'll hand back to Claire.
Phil, thank you so much for that. It was really, really helpful and really great to see real life example, and yeah, congrats to MRT Castings on all the work that you've done so far, and all the best with the work going forward. And we'll hopefully we definitely want to stay in touch with you so we can see and help you communicate that progress going forward. So we'll move quickly on now to the Q&A session, which Roya, you're going to chair for us.
Yes. No, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Very comprehensive overview. So I'm going to go straight to questions, just aware of time. And I'm going to read a couple from the chat. So Stuart, very interesting examples, but my company is a micro SME consultancy with no actual office at the moment and just 2 directors from the staff. So his question was, it would be good to know how net zero can be implemented for companies like us. So smaller SMEs, as a lot of the initiative talks about, don't seem to be that relevant for companies like us at the moment. Is this something I can pass over to one of you?
I'm happy to take that one, although I've done a lot of talking already. I mean, Axelar's do we class as a micro SME, Chris? We're 8 people.
Yeah, we do indeed. We do indeed.
And obviously, with the business that we're in, we were very keen to have a carbon footprint right from the get-go. So we measure our business travel really carefully. Encourage the team to use public transport wherever possible. But yeah, we now have an annual view on that. We also measure, even though we don't have an office either, Stuart, so we work from home, and we ask staff to share their energy consumption with us, and we take a proportion of that depending on how many rooms they have in their house to get an idea of energy usage. So even though we're really small, we want to set the example and have a carbon footprint. And the other, yeah, we undertake other initiatives as well in terms of supporting organisations that we feel are moving in the right directions, even to the extent of at Christmas time, financially supporting some initiatives that we think are moving in the right direction. Chris, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. I think just for micro businesses as well, is sort of looking at how the net zero agenda is being driven by your customers and business to business clients as well, and how you can be relevant to their impact as well, because your core product or service may be helping to save time, money, materials, various things which could in fact, be helping them to achieve a direct reduction in emissions or other kind of sustainability impact as well. So, which is something that Phil was mentioning as well, that being able to have lighter weight materials are then part of MRT's customers' emissions reductions and so on, and providing advice if as a safety business, Origin Safety, you're able to provide advice that is, as well as having a safety impact, is also beneficial in other ways potentially. That could also be that. So I think it's kind of thinking about the areas of impact that are most relevant to your business, even as a micro business, that it maybe you don't need to, and it won't be a difficult exercise to get a handle on your own direct emissions or indirect emissions, but you may be able to think about how you can help, and that then becomes a point of differentiation, which is something we'll cover in more detail again in the second of the webinars as well.
Great, thank you very much, both. I'm going to move on swiftly to the next question, which is actually from Sajid to Phil. And Phil, this is around financing your net zero journey. And so transition and really kind of expectation of return of investment on that financing.
Yeah, so clearly when we are looking at replacing old equipment with new, we're looking at the payback time of that. I would normally be comfortable funding something, if it's going to pay back within 3 to 5 years. And most of the developments we've done through the course of this program have all had paybacks of less than 5 years. We're looking at solar panel installation at the moment. That would be about a 3-year payback. So quite easy to justify either from internal funds, or if you were going to the bank or for asset finance. It's a strong enough business case if it's a payback in less than 5 years. Might be a harder sell if it's longer than that. And certainly we're seeing that finance companies and particularly asset sort of finance lenders on machinery and things like that are very open to investment in kit that's going to have a payback in that way.
Great, thank you very much for that. Sajid, sorry, I thought you were about to put another question on there, but no, thank you very much for that. Any other questions at all before we move on to the second part of the presentations? Great, I'm going to pass it back to yourself, Claire and Chris, with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for those questions, and do keep them coming. I know this is one of a series of webinars, so we'll be able to pick things up in future ones as well. So yeah, just wanted now to talk about how to get started, really, having had that sort of overview and the case study in more depth. So just moving on to the next slide. Every business is different, so as you're already starting to hear, I think there are a range of different issues here, and it can be a bit daunting, but by looking at across all these dimensions and all these different issues, but not getting bogged down in them, and actually then sort of owning it, as you do as business owners and management teams, you drive your own destiny. So the net zero journey is no different from that. So very much we advocate customizing the net zero opportunity for your business, and looking at those, the upside opportunity and the risks of doing so. And and there's a mix there of those short-term, no regrets sort of first steps, some of those medium-term ones, which this is going to be worth doing. It's got a good return on investment, but we need to explore a bit how we can fund it. We need to integrate it into our business. Our business needs to be ready to do it for us to make the most of it. Does that mean we've got to do some training alongside the capital investment, etc.? So that's the sort of medium-term stuff. And then thinking beyond that, what are the things that you really do see as part of the journey, but are really for the next business cycle or the one after that, in terms of the business planning and investment and kind of wiring it in. We don't have decades to address climate change, but you do have a number of business cycles even to 2030. There's a couple of business cycles still there of a 3-year business plan, and then to 2050, many more. So just be thinking about that and get the pace that's right for you as well. So just moving on to the next slide, in terms of some of these first steps, we've developed something called the Bright Transition Model. This was a blog I wrote a couple of years ago, and we shared, and there's a link here, and we will make sure, as Roy is saying, the slides are available so you can see the links properly and follow those up. But around the Bright Transition, looking at some of those immediate things to be sort of addressing and getting on with. We've in this next section, we've got some examples really across each of these topics. So Claire will take you through that in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and we have, just to say, on each of these topics, we've created a slide of links as well. We won't show you those now because it's just a link of slide of links. But when you get the presentation shortly after the webinar completes this afternoon, then those will be visible in the document that you get. So I hope those are useful to you. So the first next steps area we're going to look at is buildings and estate. And this really, I'll just gloss over this because I can't say it any better than Phil's said it already. Really, you've got to know what you're dealing with. You've got to monitor to be able to manage and to improve performance on topics such as energy, water and waste. As we've said before, there are cost saving opportunities here, and my question was to you is actually on the very simple energy efficiency measures in your offices and other buildings. Are they all done? And let's have a review of that as a first step. And the no regrets action on this topic is to ensure that you've got easily accessible and up-to-date information on energy, fuel, water and waste. And that will give you, as we've said, that will give you a great start in getting that carbon footprint underway. The other part of this theme is estate, and the question here is, does your business have any land that can be used to support nature? So alongside the climate crisis, we also have a biodiversity crisis, and globally we're signed up to working towards protecting at least 30% of the planet's land and water by 2030. And as usual with these things, every little counts. So any business that has any non-operational land that can be used to support nature, wildlife corridors, smaller areas that link larger areas, wildlife areas are critical to allow wildlife to move around. So if you do have any of that non-operational land, then please do explore that and see if there's anything you can do in that area. And local example, a business locally in Weybrook, the golf club there, who have, not surprisingly, quite a lot of land. Only a small amount of it, I guess, is actually used really for playing golf. I've planted 7,000 trees and are making habitats for specific bird species, and set up some beehives, which might be quite interesting actually if the golf ball goes in the wrong place, I've just thought. But overall, a fantastic initiative. The next topic is renewable energy, and we have touched on this briefly. Most businesses that are exploring renewable energy look to solar. Wind is also another opportunity. Solar panels are a good investment. They last a long time. They work across the UK, although they generally thought to work better in the south of the country. So you guys are well placed to take the opportunity. And best if you've kind of got there's a minimum size of roof that will make solar panels a good investment, which is at least 20 square meters. So this might be an opportunity for you if you've got that roof space available to you. And one of our clients that we work with in the EM3 area that I've mentioned before, Enhanced Care Services, the events, medical events providers, they've recently moved into a new building, and they were really keen to have somewhere with good environmental credentials. That they've chosen somewhere with already has solar panels fitted, and are keen to add more. And we heard from Phil that also MRT Castings are looking to move to add solar panels to their facility as well. Not everybody has the right roof space or the right things in place to go for solar. Another opportunity is to move to a renewable tariff for your business. So this means that the electricity that you buy from your provider is certified to come from renewable sources. So a good starting point is to, if you're not on a renewable tariff at the moment, is to ask your energy provider if they do have one, and if they don't, then you might look for other options. Jo from Kiba Gardening Materials, who was on the call, I think she just had to leave for another meeting, but they're based in Farnborough, and they actually swapped to a 100% renewable business electricity contract in 2020, as they felt it was an easy win in terms of bringing their carbon impact down for virtually no cost to the business. So that could be a good opportunity for some. If we move on to look at goods, including materials and food, we've talked about waste materials a lot and the opportunities to reduce it and to increase recycling and reuse. I think this is a key one. Depending on your business, you might have the opportunity to have a separate food waste collection, because food waste in the residual bin creates a real problem, and actually food waste is quite valuable. So it's good to collect that separately. And yeah, in terms of that, there are a number of businesses who are making use of food waste, or what would go on to be food waste, to redistribute that to other organisations. So Ocado, they have one of their fulfilment centres in Andover, and they work with food banks and charities and organisations and animal parks to redistribute food that would otherwise go to waste. And a particular favourite of the AXLR team, Too Good To Go, is a service, a mobile app that connects customers to restaurants and stores that have surplus unsold food, and you could go along at certain times of day, alerted by the app, and get bargain treats from cafes and restaurants and shops. And Kiba Gardening Materials, again, they've diverted over 10 tonnes of surplus and unsellable products by donating them to help improve 16 community gardens and outdoor spaces. So these are almost all social examples. So good in making connections to the local community. The final thing in this area is to think about the goods and services that you are buying, and looking for efficiencies. So my no regrets action in this space is to review your business purchases to ensure that they're all necessary, and to identify opportunities to buy less or reuse. I think sometimes we don't know what we've got really, and often I've seen businesses buying new stuff when actually they've got what they bought this stuck at the back of a cupboard in the warehouse somewhere. So yeah, this is a large area, multifaceted. So just a quick chat round that one. We move on to transport. See the government's slightly updated target on electric vehicles by 2035. but with significant percentage of new cars by 2030. This is one that all businesses will need to think about. I think we've heard from, again, Phil, MRT, looking to make this change. Certainly anybody who goes to deliver in a city, this will be an absolute priority with the clean air zones. Interestingly, or not surprisingly, the AA based in Basingstoke are making some efforts in this area to transition their fleet to sustainable vehicles. They've got a business events van which is fully electric, and they're doing lots of trials, installing chargers, and actually helping staff through a salary sacrifice scheme to lease EVs and make the most of those benefits. And the final area that we're going to touch on is your team. So we know that our staff are our greatest resource, and increasingly sustainability and net zero are important to many people. So is there enough interest within your business to create a green team, or to have one green champion who can help push this forward within the business? Depending on where you're located and the accessibility to public transport, could you encourage people to travel to work in more sustainable ways? There's things like cycle to work schemes that can be accessed. And one of the most impactful things we can do as individuals actually is to invest our money into sustainable pension options. And does your business pension provider offer that opportunity? If it does, that's something you can promote to your employers, or perhaps look to move to somewhere different if they don't in the long term. So that's a very whirlwind trip round some first steps. I've just drawn all together there all the no regrets actions into a little journey for you to visualize. Some actions are more effort than others, but there are some things that actually are not too much work to get started, and hopefully not too daunting. But getting the team on board seems like a really good starting point. And yeah, really, although carbon emissions are critical, all the other actions that sit around that to help improve biodiversity and potentially to support your local community as well are really important. Phil touched on the heat map. This is something that Axelar we've been using to quickly map out where your biggest impacts are and where to prioritise your actions, not only across your own business, but to think about the supply chain and in the longer term, your influence on climate action in wider society. And we've also been working on a more detailed net zero action plan that has kind of the headings that you see on the slide. And we've worked this through with a number of the clients that we've worked with in the EM3 region, and we'd love to support some more businesses through this process, and aligns not only to the topics here, but also to the Sustainable Development Goals as well, which is important to align with in the long term. So, as I said in the presentation that you will receive, there'll be a whole host of links against each of those topics that you can review, and hopefully there'll be something there of interest for everybody. We just wanted to quickly focus on one resource in particular, which is the UK Business Climate Hub, which is a resource specifically for SMEs. And is supported by government and by the Small Business Federation of Small Business and the Chamber of Commerce. And Rupert's kindly just flashed that up onto the screen there. And if we just take a look at the drop downs along the, I'm not seeing that super well how. Let me just make my screen a bit bigger. So under the making a start menu, Rupert, if you could just move up to that. It gives you some very kind of down-to-earth advice on getting started with monitoring your energy use, all the stuff that we've talked about today, and much more. Then if we just go back up to that, the 7 steps to sustainability. Talks about involving your team, taking action and kind of building up that approach. Rupert, happy for you just to scroll through those pages at the top that you've got there. Then by theme, so there we see some of those will look familiar to you, and again much more than we've talked about today. And then something we've not been able to talk to today too much, because we've been trying to keep it relevant to everybody, is they do have an interesting section by browse by sector. So there's information that starts to be relevant to a whole host of different types of business sector. So please do, if you look at one thing as the result, actually that's not, if you look at 2 things as a result of this webinar, this should be one of them. Could just go back to our presentation and we'll just flick through this now. Thank you. So these are the other things you should look at. We have 2 future webinars coming up that follow on after this one. And so the idea is this is kind of a basic starting point, quick wins, first steps. The second webinar will explore more about how you can use your net zero work to differentiate your business, your product or service from a crowded market, and we will start to look in more detail at things like carbon footprinting, environmental product declarations, and different types of business model that you might adopt, amongst much more. We'll have another really exciting case study for you on that one as well. Then the final webinar is in the last day of January, and really this is kind of Net Zero Advanced Plus, which will focus on taking your business to the next level and really thinking through your business, kind of embedding net zero into your business strategy and looking at these key kind of mega trends going forward, being regenerative, being climate resilient and nature positive business. So really taking things to the next level. Actually, it wasn't just one thing you should do. There's quite a number of things you should do. We would, as Roya has mentioned already, and Phil has kind of built upon for us, the opportunity to access one-to-one net zero support through the Growth Hub is still available. And the way you can do that is to visit this web link and to sign up. And this will take you through to the Growth Hub, and the guys there will just check that you are eligible and take things from there. It's very, as Phil kindly said, it is a very simple process. And yeah, Accela are in the process of developing a net zero tracker diagnostic tool for business diagnostic tools, and we need some businesses to help test our beta version on quite soon. So if anybody's interested in that, then they should drop us a line. And brilliant. But on that note, I will hand back over to Chris just to wind things up from our end.
Thank you so much, Claire, and Phil as well. We've done what it said on the tin. We've introduced the climate change topic, the urgency, and how net zero fits into that. We've looked at that sort of overall, what is the overall landscape and the holistic picture there, what are those potential benefits within that, and then tried to drill into that, to slice and dice that in different ways to show you, both through Phil's case study and everything, the great work that MRT are doing, and also lots of other little anecdotal case studies along the way that Claire's shown, and then hopefully those resources will be useful for you to have a browse in at your leisure. And we hope you can join us in the future seminars as well. So just onto my final slide before I hand back to Roya. There is a sort of this competitive advantage play that we kind of can't stress enough, really, that it doesn't mean you need to do everything all at once, and that was well said as well by Phil, but making some steps and sort of getting ahead of the issue. We are seeing lots of businesses that are really seeing either cost or market share and so on benefits that are coming from that. So and I think being in a place as well, you know, we're all kind of global businesses now. We can communicate globally, but we're also in a place, so our people live and work in different towns and places around this part of the country, where a lot of the businesses joining us today will probably be in Hampshire and Surrey, and there's a lot that can be done with learning and collaborating a little bit in your local areas as well as globally in your supply chains and value chains with your customers as well. And with that, I will hand back to Roya.
Thank you very much, Chris, Claire, Phil. Excellent presentation. As we have 3 minutes, and we had a question slightly earlier from Dean here, again around finance and that upfront financial cost. Actually kind of throwing over another question to you based on that. The Climate Hub portal you mentioned, or yourselves, is there a kind of comprehensive list of grants that might be available for SMEs to help them as part of that journey? We have some, I'm aware, kind of locally, but perhaps others on a more national perspective.
Yeah, I can take those kind of 2 linked questions if you like. The hub has been consolidated from 2 previous hubs. One was launched for the climate change talks in COP26 in Glasgow, and then another one was sort of started really very much with SMEs in mind. They've been merged, and yes, it is their intention on a national level to have a pretty good handle on the grants and the funding, so that it means that not every local authority around the country needs to necessarily maintain that information, although where there are specific and local things, then it's a good idea to have a look at that as well. But yeah, over time they are definitely developing it for that purpose. So it's a good place to start, not the only place, but it is a good place to start to look at funding and to kind of answer that question about, upfront investment. Yeah, depending on what it is, particularly energy is very saleable and investable. So the money can be loaned, or assets can be, and roofs can be rented, etc., for different types of energy infrastructure, even if you don't have the capital to invest in that yourself. So depending on what it is and depending on the scale, there are different options there. And there are also some grant schemes. So there was something called a low case, which is now wound down, but there is some funding. So in certain parts of Hampshire, depending on where you are, or Surrey and elsewhere, there may be some grants through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and the Rural Fund as well. So and some of that may be available for capital investment in things like solar power and so on, at least co-investment. So it may mean that the business case and the capital you can raise can be matched or partially matched as well. So some of those things are popping up again following the low case and the other programs which were linked to European funding, which have now wound down. So we're in transition, but new funding is available, as well as I say, private investment in energy and other forms of these benefits.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. And of course, coming on board with the Growth Hub, you'll also, any local grants we'll be able to share with you as well on that. And also really that kind of bespoke one-to-one support with Chris and Claire as well. I think Phil mentioned the expectations, how it can differ depending on sectors. So really do use that opportunity to come and have that more kind of tailored, bespoke support through the Growth Hub. Just before we leave as well, you'll see there's a QR code there. We've got more workshops coming up. We've got some marketing and leadership and management ones coming up for the end of the year, and an AI conference on the 5th of December. And of course, the follow-up webinar, which Claire mentioned, which is on the 13th of December. And all that leaves me to say thank you very much again to all the speakers today, and hope you all have a great rest of the week. Thank you.